pegar chuva de manhã, né? Acho que todo mundo teve dificuldade para chegar no horário, então por isso que esperamos um pouquinho para garantir que todo mundo pudesse chegar para o começo da palestra do professor Francesco Berna. Francesco, ele é professor de arqueologia na Universidade Simon Fraser, no Canadá. Ele fez a graduação e o doutorado na Itália, na Universidade de Florença. Tem pós-doutorado também pelo Instituto Weizmann, em Israel. Foi professor também da Universidade de Boston, nos Estados Unidos. E ele é uma das maiores referências, na verdade, um dos pioneiros no uso do método do FTIR, né, da espectroscopia no infravermelho por transformada de Fourier, esse método que a tradutora adora que a gente fale. Ele foi um dos pioneiros com trabalhos principalmente sobre queima de sedimentos, né, como identificar a queima a partir desse método tão comum na química, e que ele foi um dos primeiros em importar para a arqueologia e começar a ver essas aplicações tão úteis que tem para o nosso campo, né? E não só vinculado à queima de sedimentos, mas também à queima de ossos, a intemperismo de ossos. Acho que todo mundo aqui da geoarqueologia que já mexeu com osso intemperado já leu o trabalho dele sobre o pH, quando que o fosfato se combina com alumínio, quando que dissolve, quando recristaliza. É ele. Tá aqui, ó. Trouxemos ele porque é figura, né, para todo mundo que trabalha. E também a gente tem uma colaboração com o Francesco, a minha aluna que ele esteve lá recentemente, ele recebeu também para fazer estágio, né? Então a gente tenta manter sempre essas redes internacionais, formando alunos, né, utilizando essa expertise dos profissionais pioneiros na nossa área para formar os nossos estudantes também e trazer esse conhecimento para a arqueologia latino-americana, também brasileira, no caso. Então, eu queria agradecer muito, Francesco, também por ter topado esse convite, que, na verdade, vem desde o último congresso do DIG, do Developing International Geoarchaeology, que o penúltimo, né, que o Francesco organizou em Vancouver, e ele, na verdade, que jogou assim para a plateia o por que não São Paulo para o próximo. E eu só estava sentada aí como mais uma participante e, de repente, senti a carga da pressão. Mas foi bom, acho que foi graças a essa iniciativa que estamos todos aqui reunidos também hoje. O Francesco vai fazer uma apresentação também que acho que desperta muito nosso interesse aqui na arqueologia latino-americana, porque há aquela questão de como é que a gente combina esses métodos de alta resolução da geoarqueologia, como a micromorfologia, FTIR, difractometria, X, para estudar e trabalhar junto com as comunidades indígenas, no caso, com as primeiras nações do Canadá, que é um trabalho que ele tem desenvolvido desde que começou a trabalhar lá na Universidade de Simon Fraser. Então, thank you, Francesco, once again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Jimena, for organizing this amazing DIG-GEGAL number 10. And yes, I'm very supportive of you working here, and coming here in São Paulo has been fantastic. And let me begin with the talk.
Go ahead.
So today I will show you something. It's not very heavy in the methods, and in the result, it's more about like a broader application. And we'll start talking about a little bit what is indigenous archaeology. I guess everyone knows what it is, but just in case. And it's also, I decided to do this because I know that before me, I had people that are developing the cutting edge of micromorphology and other new methods applied to the microstratigraphic approach. So I'm also very grateful to Carolina, Mareike, and Chris to have really gave a fantastic, overview where is the present and the future of microarchaeology and geoarchaeology at a microscopic scale. Today, I will talk more about, micromorphology. You'll see is a small part, but it's fundamental as usual. And it's a multi-scalar project, and it's for the nations, the Sts'ailes nation, and I'll I'll proceed and I'll show you what we did for them. So what is indigenous archaeology? I guess everyone know, but just let's let's refresh it. So basically, it's archaeology, which is done in the interest of indigenous communities. And so that comprise a lot of interest that the community have, starting with heritage research management. So whenever find something archaeological, they want to study and protect it. But also, there's a lot of going on with developing permits around and outside, for instance, uh, their reserves, so they still have claims outside the reserves. So there's a lot of going on, for instance, in Vancouver about claims or different remains that are found in different areas where they are developed. I also want to say that indigenous archaeology is very, very popular among our students, and it's all what they care now in Canada. So that I work with Neanderthals, so I discovered one of the earliest fire. They care up to a certain point. So what they want to come is work with indigenous people, and I'll talk a little bit why later. Then also there's a lot of emphasis for the indigenous people, indigenous community, or First Nation, how we call it in Canada, to try to revitalize their traditional knowledge and reconnect, especially the youth, with their grandparents. And when the elders die, for them it's very, very sad, not only because they lose a person they love important, but also because, as you may know, in this part of the world, all the knowledge is transferred orally. They have languages, very complex languages, but they don't really have a writing system. And another very important part of archaeology, working with indigenous people, is to look at ecological restoration of and ecological and protection of the environments that are being continuously challenged by developing, you probably are familiar with fracking or building, pipelines. And to be honest, the only person that really care about the environment in Canada, maybe Lucy, and they fight for it, is indigenous communities, especially the one that live remotely in areas that are outside, far away from the eyes of every Canadian there. And also, the archaeology is used, and I'll show you an example, for creating cultural and ecotourism in some area that they are, they manage, or sometimes their reserves. So another important aspect of indigenous archaeology, which is informed by oral history and traditional knowledge. So that's a big question. Is sometimes we have this misconception that the traditional knowledge doesn't equal to science. In some cases, equals 100% to science. And anyway, when I work with them trying to interpret the features or a house, which is it's in their land. I went and I asked them, okay, this is what I see in micromorphology. How would you interpret this, right? Because I don't know. Can you tell me? And that was really, really an amazing conversation we had, and really, helped me to be more confident on what I was saying. So there are two kind of indigenous archaeologists. The best one that we could try to achieve is the indigenous archaeology that is practiced by indigenous scholars themselves. I and, for instance, Morgan here, Morgan Ricci, do work for them. And whatever they, want us to help them with, we do it. Here, instead, you have an example of one of the prominent indigenous scholar from Canada. It's Rudy Reimer, which is in my department at SFU, and is an expert of XRF and sourcing obsidian. So every time someone in Canada find obsidian, sends it to Rudy, because he has this amazing database, and it's a pretty, quick and dirty technique, but it's very reliable, and he is being flown all over the mountain in BC, but also somewhere else. And also, Rudy is an amazing communicator, and he's hosting Indigenous Archaeology TV show in the Aboriginal TV channel, which is really popular, and I think you can download it and watch it for free, or for, I don't know, $3 a month or a year, if you want to. So in Canada, archaeology, in particular indigenous archaeology, is become a big part of a big process. It's called reconciliation between the federal government, the provincial government, and indigenous populations, or the First Nations that, they're being mistreated. And I don't want to get too much in detail on that, but it's felt very strongly by the younger generation, and especially the brightest people, and it's very important for young generation from high school on. And and the government is very sensitive to this, and so is engaged in an indigenization of the society and the school curricula. So from grade school up to university, we are engaged in indigenization of the curriculum. So, we want to really incorporate traditional knowledge, and especially the indigenous people perspective on learning and other factors. Okay, so the Sts'ailes or Sts'ailes are First Nation that reside under 20 kilometers from Vancouver, along the Fraser River. Actually, along a river, it's called the Harrison River, which connects the Harrison Lake to the Fraser River, which is a major river in southern British Columbia, and which eventually end up into where Vancouver is, and which produce a gigantic Holocene delta, which is now is super inhabited, one of the most densely populated area. The nations are based on reserve land, which is very small compared what their traditional territory was, but they are run by the chief and the council, and they do archaeology through the right and title office. Here, I want to thank Chief Ralph Leon and Boyd Peters and William Charlie, that were the former chief. They've been so welcoming to me, and when I went, they took me around, and they took me really seriously. And I'll show you later also how we operated. So when you work with Sts'ailes in archaeology, the Deus ex machina is Morgan Ricci, their chief archaeologist, and he works in the Sts'ailes reserves and in the traditional territory of the Sts'ailes, which goes, if the reserve is a little speckle here, their traditional territory goes all around the Harrison Lake, which is 50 kilometers long. It's basically a small internal sea, and it's gigantic. So they deal with, heritage resource management mainly, but also land claims, with the federal government, with private owners. And then another important things, they try to, especially the council, the elders, they try to revitalize traditional knowledge. They try to engage youth all the time. They have a beautiful school, high school in their reserve, and they do a lot of ecological restoration. So they learn through archaeology what kind of environment ecology was there, and then they try to rebuild the ecology of their reserve, but also the whole wider area. And they try also to develop a little bit of tourism to try to attract, a little bit of an income. But I know that the elder don't like that very much, so they keep it slow about that. So I'll bring you to my ARC 100 class here, and I want to put the Sts'ailes in the big picture of BC and Northwest Coast archaeology. I don't know, I feel like I have to do this because before moving there, I didn't know anything about BC archaeology or Northwest Coast archaeology, and I can tell you it's a fascinating archaeology. So anyway, we know that people were around the coast, the islands in particular, around 14,000 years ago, give and take, doesn't really matter. And they extensively populated the coasts, the islands, and the interior through the rivers and lakes. So the coastal people have connection well into the mountains, and so Sts'ailes, they are part of the Coast Salish people that have connection all the way down to Washington, and here is a map of all the the documented sites that basically date from 14,000 to pre-contact to contact. So very densely inhabited area. One of the problem is that a lot of the most beautiful object that the Northwest Coast people did and produced were made of perishable material like wood, shell, bone, basketry, wool, hide, pelts, all kind of textiles. And so very rarely it's found, but when it's found, especially in flooded or areas or sites, some of the most amazing things were found. For instance, here there's a saddle, a whale saddle, made with cedar and sea otter teeth. This has come from an OZ site here in this area, actually Washington State, and it's dated about 1,500 years ago. There are ritual spoons, of course. The totem poles, all this stuff is very amazing. Unfortunately, it doesn't preserve very well, and so we don't know very much. What we deal mainly is 10% of the material culture, which was stone implements. So the nations are divided based on some languages, traditions. Today, the BC government lists 34 languages, but they can be grouped in of course, in larger groups. And the Sts'ailes, as many others of the Vancouver area, are part of the Coast Salish down here. And they're one of the largest group, but also among them, they speak different languages. And it's not part of archaeology, but a part of the indigenization or revitalization or the, counter-colonialism, uh, is the maintainment and the revitalization in languages is a big project that also our university is engaged in it. So what these people were defined by Westerners as complex hunter-gatherer societies. They exploited rich marine resources. They were semi-sedentary. They settled in permanent and semi-permanent villages. At the beginning, made with plank houses, so that are basically you can move them from an island to the other, and they use the landscape and manage the landscape to the point that they were able to extend the intertidal area of some beaches, making stone walls in the water to increase the productivity of clams, which was one of their um, uh, resource. And so those are called clam gardens, and they found around a lot of the coast areas. They were extensively managing the forest to create meadows by prescribed fire. So this has also been documented, and now also clear that for plants like crab apples, hazelnuts, and other important trees and fruit trees, um, they were managing areas and that now are called forest gardens, but we can call it orchards. And so like a low footprint, but definitely important in the and also we know that they were processing and storing a lot of food, in particular salmon and berries and other resources. So what I didn't know when I moved to BC is that both ethnographic and archaeological evidence shows that the society were hierarchically divided into nobles, the commoners, and then they had slaves. Um, and how this hierarchy was implemented was through practice called potlatches, which were this festive, competitive display of wealth, and they also raid each other, with clubs and axes, and they take prisoners and then they enslaved. What is important for this kind of society is the longhouses, which are these big plank houses, very, very big, where they had the potlatches, but all other type of ceremonies like dances and and all kind of gathering. And this is bring me to what we are finding in Sts'ailes, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, longhouse that are found in southern British Columbia, which is dated to 2,500 years ago. No, PP, yes, calibrated. So how does work in Sts'ailes archaeology? So Morgan Ritchie has been working with them for a long time, and he works really on a multiscalar scale. And he invited me to do micromorphology first on islands and like baseline work, and then when they found the house that I'll show you, he invited me immediately to work on it. So it's been lidar the whole areas, and which is very difficult to survey because it's super vegetated. And but using lidar, it could find tons of rectangular features, which he recognizes as plank house footprints, and circular depression, which are pit houses that are normally behind the plank houses. The plank houses will be along the river, and the pit houses will be behind us. So here you see these long rectangular features are the plank houses, and these red spots are the pit houses. And here you have the modern village of Sts'ailes. Other stuff that you find in the landscape are firecrack rocks accumulation, or FCRs, which represent cooking or roasting pits, and also some depressions that are considered, that are interpreted to be storage. And then now some areas start to appear that they were also managed as orchards or as forest gardens. And this is the latest research they're doing there. So I'm going to present a little bit on Morgan's work on so it basically on the LiDAR, it managed to find 14 settlements, comprised both of plank houses, pit houses. He excavated 78 houses, 53 plank and 25 pit houses, collected 91 radiocarbon dates from house surfaces, and collected 127 radiocarbon samples from all kind of other archaeological features. And he came up with a chronology of the area, and basically looks like the first plank houses start to appearing about 3,000 years ago, Cal BP, while the pit house start to appear 1,500 years later. There may be a period of non-construction over abandonment between 2,400 and 1,800, but then after that, the site was continuously inhabited. So the Sts'ailes First Nation, they really can claim that's their land because the population dropped only with smallpox. So, someone lived there. So, to be a little bit more in detail, they model a little bit the area. So the Sts'ailes start to the first. So the earliest evidence of human around there is on this side of the river, not the side that we show, and it's dated around 8,000 years. But then the first plank house came about 2,500 years ago. So the one that we studied is the one here in the middle there. And then they think there were 8 plank houses, so 8 families, maybe 200 people. Then the next well-represented time is between 1500 and 1250 Cal BP, where there is 30 plank houses, and maybe the population got to 700 people or maybe even more. And then the peak, the classic Sts'ailes period, is between 500 to 250 Cal BP, where there were a very large village and with, over 2,000 people being there. How much time I have? I start late. So, okay. So I can talk forever. So the project, finally, let's cut to the chase. The Sts'ailes are developing an area that they call Main Beach along the Harrison Rivers, which is connected to the Harrison Lake, which is housing the Harrison Hot Spring, which is a really fancy touristic place. And so they were developing this area, and while they were developing it by building this new super duper dock and a plank house and all the services, they inadvertently start to disturb a new archaeological feature that they didn't know about it, and they call it DHR-L18. So here's when they found it, and you can see it's tons of floors and all lamination. So when Morgan, which is the guy with in the middle there, saw this lamination and said, I need to call Francesco. And one thing that it was impressed with is that the floors, these orange layers that were harder than generally other floors that he's been excavating. So he's been excavating a lot of houses, but this floor, he felt it differently. And I trust archaeologists with their trowel much more than I do. To me, they all look like dirt until I don't see it in the microscope. I cannot guess, right? So I said, oh, maybe they're floods, who knows? So, I was very skeptical. So anyway, I wanted to do this, not just for Morgan, but me and Morgan decided, let's do it with the community and for the community. So I invited the community to say, look, I'm coming this day to sample, and I like to sample with everyone that wants to be involved. Next thing I know, the chief is there, all the council members are there, that we pray, we do all, and the chief start to tell me, about, all the history of the region and how they live now and how different it was. And so basically we have a big lunch and we sample, this is really the Italian style too, So I felt at home. They, I hope they. I know. I think they are asleep now. So we we had the council members. So those are big deals. They don't go to these things normally. And then we also have schools. So they also have a program which is outside school, and they do filming. So we had a few students that at the beginning looked very bored, but then you could see at the end of the day they were chipping stones and doing all kind of interesting things besides filming us and asking us to act and everything, which took us a little longer than what we. So, all right, let's cut to the chase. So we sampled. This was really destroyed. So just to assess what kind of thing were we dealing with, we sampled very quickly. 6 box, and we use the microstratigraphic approach that we all very fond of, and we start to try to describe in the field the stratigraphy. And as you can see, I don't know if I'm a splitter or a lamper. I try to lamp because I'm lazy, but in the end you have to split. And so we had all this sequence, and now the big issue was, what are those orange, layers of strata made of? Are they anthropogenic? Are they, flat deposit in between anthropogenic, phases? And as you can see, I don't know if you can see, we choose an area which was really next to a major pit hole, so probably a big totem post or post hole from the house. And so some of the floors actually are that phase. Some other ones were cut through. And so one of the most striking thing that I found was that when you start at the bottom, that orange number 8 layer is probably the first anthropogenic deposit that we have preserved. Who knows if they remove something? And the matrix that looks, orangey and kind of clear, limpid, when it's in plane polarized light, when you cross polarize, it becomes totally isotropic. So it's like made of glass. So I said, oh, maybe it's overfired or something like this. But then it doesn't look like overfired clay. And it doesn't look, there's a lot of bones mixed in this material. So So this thick surface was made with isotropic clay, sand, which is local, and then it was full of fragmented bone fragments. Stay fragments. And some fragments were burned, some not. So some are rounded, some are angular. So what I think it's actually a mix, that they did a recipe, say let's mix these strange clays with sand, local sand, and let's put some bone in it. Now, in this part of the world, there's no calcite. There's very not much calcium in the system, and so. But if you add bone into the system, you start to release calcium because bone has a lot of calcium. So when you have clays that are very reactive, like isotropic clays, and you add calcium to it, you may end up doing calcium silicate, which is basically a pozzolanic reaction, or what the Roman would call hydraulic mortar. This is not published yet. Don't copy me, okay? So it's a big claim, and so I started working on the clay mineralogy here. But when you deal with this kind of clay, it's difficult because they're not very crystalline, so they look like nothing most of the time, and it's very difficult to analyze them. And you need to be a clay mineralogist, and I'm not. So let's move on. So that's what the first surprise thing. So that maybe that's the reason why these floors are really hard. We analyze other floors. The clay is the typical kaolinite smectite mix. When you burn it. It's like Berna 2007. It works perfectly. This one doesn't. So when you go up, I was very interested in those lamination there, and just let's cut to the chase. What you see are, so the orange layers again are this clay mixing with sand, and you have on top of it a surface which is kind of what do you say? The way I see this, you start with this mix of clay and sand, and sometimes charcoal in it, sometimes bone in it, and then this stuff gets washed, the fine material gets washed away, and you start to adjust the sandy part that doesn't get washed away. Mixed with the sandy part, you have a lot of charcoal and a lot of fragments of bones. Very difficult to interpret. But so and it's repeated. So it's like you have this, let's say, mud floors. I would call it mud floors. Then you have a sand surface with our intersurface by charcoal layers and fragmented bones. So here an example of the intimate relationship with the charcoal and bones. They're very small bones. I couldn't find yet like a clear fish bone, but normally that's what people would do with smoked fish. So you would have charcoal and fire, and then the fish getting down there. So when we look at the old sequence, it looks like we have a channel, sand, or maybe a sandbar. Then we have a gravel bar, and then we have a sandbar. And then on top of the sandbar, where you have number 9 there, it's all a layer of charcoal material. We interpret that as probably the beach surface, and then on top of that, you start to have the first mud floor with this isotropic clay, sand, bone fragment, and charcoal. Then there is a big number 7 is a fill for the surface. So it's probably they did some kind of either there's a pit. Anyway, they level, And then they build these 6 mud surfaces and charcoal and organic rich sandy surfaces, like very much like what I show you for layer 4. So layer 6 seems a layer 4, but like the same microfacies if you want, but a little bit more degraded than 4, which is fresher. And then the sequence there finish with mud floor, but in this case they don't have bone or charcoal mix, so it's pure mud. Maybe they decided it works anyway. We don't need the, the so I presented this to the elder, to the people, and say, oh, I said, this kind of clay I'm familiar with. For instance, in the Vesuvius plain, you have, this kind of clay. I don't think you guys were going all the way to Napoli to take this. And the volcanic system around there, it's very basaltic, so they wouldn't produce that kind of soils. So you need to find an acid volcano. The closest volcano I know that's very acid around there is Mount St. Helens, but seems very, very far. So, but talking to the people in the room said, no, we wouldn't canoe stuff from up the river. The source must be, sorry, down the river, up. So the source must be up the river. And they were telling me effectively when they now build their longhouses, it's all dirt that they have the floor, and the floor that they use, the sand that they use is a special sand. Uncle Charlie was going somewhere to get it. I guess it was going to Home Depot, but in the past maybe they were going somewhere else. So working with Ray McMillan here and other people that start looking at potential sources for this kind of um, clays. And so the first candidate was an outcrop of the Nooksack Harrison terrain, which goes down to the Jurassic, and it's called chocolate bar because it actually looks like a chocolate bar going into the water, and it's welded tough. So they say maybe that's weathering. So we went with a boat, we sample, the weathering rock, we sample. Here it's also very important because there's caves and there's rock paintings there. So we went and sampled that kind of soil there. And then we went to some other outcrop along this little creek called Morris Creek, where you have this nice level that maybe was tough, maybe was some kind of clay. We sampled everything, but I was very interested in the mud where we landed. And I don't know if you can appreciate, I sample some mud next to the footprint of a big black bear. And we sample it, and then I start working in the mineralogy with it. We did bulk analysis, and everything didn't show very much. So I start separating the clays and just running the clay. First thing I did FTIR and also did XRD. XRD weren't very informative, but what was very interesting is that once I take the suspension from the floors and I compare it with the clay suspension that I have, for instance, Solana soil from Naples, they have a quite good match. And the next thing that it's, I'm not saying they come from there, not saying that, but it means that those are, the other thing I noticed is that the mud from the footprint there is the closest thing. There is not much for any of those, pure layer from the outcrop. There is not much with the welded tuff, and there is not much with the soil forming under the welded tuff. That was it's a disappointment because we were hoping that we could have a match. So anyway, this is much work in process. We really have to go deep into this issues of the clays and where they come from before we can say something. But the community really, start to think that this is something that they want to preserve. It's very special. And so they put down a big grant. They got 2 million to build and protect the whole excavation, which was excavated further since we sampled. And now they want to, do some kind of display, and we can work there in protection. But at the same time, I think I will be very much engaged on going around BC trying to find the source of this clay. So in conclusion, the geoarchaeology we did for the Sts'ailes suggests that about 2,450 years ago, the ancestors of modern Sts'ailes were preparing the floors of the longhouses by selecting specific mud material that contain isotropic clay. And one of this corner in the proximity of the large posthole witnessed activities that included mud floor preparation and burning and possibly animal processing. I asked the chief about this. He said, normally we wouldn't do this activity today. We wouldn't do processing food in the longhouse. The longhouse is sacred. We do fire, we do all this kind of thing. But he said, maybe 2,500 years ago, one corner could have been used for that. So he's, and the other important thing is that the microcontextual approach proved to be essential to accurately investigate ancient human practices and interaction with the landscape. So this is because I'm wishful of this, but if we didn't do micromorphology, we probably would have lost this very interesting implication. It could be that eventually we could come up with different explanation, but I think that's a good explanation. And then the multi-scholar geoarchaeological work is helping the community to revitalize one of the oldest longhouses found in the region and learn about some of the practice that they may have lost through the centuries. Obrigado, and I can accept question if you want.
Francesco, for the excellent talk. Questions, anybody? Comments? Yeah. Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. This is amazing and very interesting. Have you tried to do some geochemical analysis to try to figure out from which part of which kind of materials could be involved?
So I didn't do any XRF or any SEM yet, or EDS, because I'm pretty sure we're dealing with this isotropic clays. Now the problem is if we don't find where they come from, so for the moment, geochemistry, I don't think it would help me very much. I would say, for all the samples that I show you, the source, I put them in the microscope, so I made thin section out of it just to see if we get the same kind of behavior, and I couldn't find any much. So I just okay, they will look geochemically different. And anyway, so it was a little disappointing that chocolate bar wasn't the place, but I didn't give up yet, because I think what we need to do is to levitate this sediment and see if we can separate the clay from. I did it, but I think we should do more with that. Yes.
Thank you very much, Francesco. I felt myself as in Siberia. It looks so similar.
Okay.
And related to Siberia and boreal ecosystems, my question, I think quite logical. is the following. Orange color, isotropic clay. All is so similar to alluvial horizons of podsols, spodic material. Do you have podsols there? And did you try with this hypothesis?
Yes, because when I was searching for this kind of, say, they form also in podsols, but I didn't find any podsol that was so thick that you could go and scrape it. So the fact that maybe they accumulated in the river mud, this get washed out, and then maybe that river here, that bend there, collects all this clay. So maybe that's the easiest source. But the fact that the match it's really with you know the Pozzolana soil in Italy shows me that it must coming from acid volcanic ashes that are degrading. And also another signal in the FTIR is it's not a match 100%, but it's a zeolite. So that's what could. So there's two about one that were over fired. So you put the mud and then they make a huge fire and then, but you don't get signal of burning in bone that it's mixed with it. So I don't think the clays are refractory, so they could, protect the bone to the point that they don't get calcined completely. And so, of course, the other thing that we're planning, I didn't say, is some experiments. So try, but the problem is that we don't know what the original material is. So what do we experiment with? Because we have other houses which have a nice red horizon, and it's kaolinite burnt, metakaolinite. Easy. You still have the smectite, the kaolinite is gone. So that's what we thought we were there. And I was really going there as a routine, and then we find this. And in the other floors, they don't mix bones in the clays. At the beginning, I thought it was just, accidental mixing, honestly, okay, it's just, but I start to think it's not accidental because in the layer on top, they don't have it. I don't know.
Well, if a podsol hypothesis is true and spodic horizon is somehow involved, the check could be also oxalate extraction, also which I proposed to Nicholas at one moment, and the clays could be something like imogolite and amorphous aluminium and iron compounds, and then phosphorus will go with them.
If it's that, okay, I'll do phosphorus analysis. The problem is that you have bone. So how do you separate the bone phosphorus from? So I'm not. Well, the other thing is I'm not 100% sure that so in the interior we still have podsol here. I have to check. I think we have along the rivers because it's wet enough. Definitely on the coast is plenty of podsols. Yeah. But so were you suggesting, and then they find a big, thick horizons of what is it, BH? And then they take that. But I don't see any of that organic matter that it's mixed with it. Anyway, this is too much a two-way comparison.
Okay, questions? Anybody else? No? Cool.
Eu vou precisar da tua tradução. Se eu faço toda a pergunta ou em partes? Bom, primeiro, eu observei num slide associado ao sistema fluvial que há uma variação de faces relacionados com diferentes ambientes de energia. Teoricamente, esse aí é excelente. Teoricamente, quando se tem uma quebra brusca e tem contato brusco, nesse contato todo, como tem variação de energia, é um momento ideal para que eu tenha elementos minerais ou fragmentos de rocha transportados com distintas energias, distintos momentos. Quando se faz a lâmina, por exemplo, você conseguiu identificar isso no contato, porque tem o contato bem nítido nessas imagens aí. E eu, por exemplo, eu nunca consegui ver em lâmina esse contato e identificar diferentes elementos com as diferentes faces.
9 it's laminated.
Sim.
And if you go to a beach on the river, what you see all this organic matter when there's low energy that coats the sand. And so one interpretation is this part there is not really fire made in place, but there's a lot of people around, there's a lot of burning around, and all the charcoal and grasses come. So that's why I interpret this the surface of a beach. Like down there, I don't know, because it could have been a sandbar or a dry out, the tallweg of a river or something, and so we don't know. Do I answer your questions, or I didn't get your question? Gracias.
Someone else? Lisa, you guys are curious.
We are. Yes. Magnetic susceptibility has demonstrated that can be associated to burning. So have you tried to do in order to detect some changes in the mineralogy that can be detected with the magnetic susceptibility?
No, I even have the instrument in my lab, and I didn't do it. Again, I'm obsessed with finding the clays, and first want to know that there must be burning, because maybe after they made the mix. So I think we're gonna find some burning for sure. But how do we know if the burning was part of the recipe or is post?
Okay. Yeah, open question.
Sorry.
It happens.
Thank you. No.
The last one.
Thank you, Francesco, for this wonderful talk, and congratulations for the work. I think this is very, very inspiring, because we working with indigenous nations also here in Brazil. I think most people have like a panic of contradicting the ontology. Like I know some projects that people don't allow archaeologists to share the dates of the archaeological sites, or even to date the archaeological site, not to contradict or to create this conflict with traditional histories and traditional knowledge. And I think your case study is showing, is demonstrating that maybe we are subestimating the ability of those peoples to cope with the thing, and to like change their own history also based on what we are finding and interpreting this with us. And I would like to ask you actually, to what extent do you think that this knowledge can also change your interpretation of this clays? It's not my field of expertise. I don't know how to look to a slide, but I think I'm trying more to ask about the collaboration process. Like, do the shamans also look to the slides with you? What do they think about the clays? what kind of interpretation they have, and to which extent you think this kind of exchange of knowledge can change both sides, because we know that it changed their sides, because they say, okay, it's not normal, but maybe 2,000 years ago they can do a corner with a fire pit. But to the other side, how is the collaboration process?
Sts'ailes are really welcoming. They are very open. But of course, when for instance, when I say, oh, this is look very much like, stuff that you can find around the Vesuvio in Italy, right? So I said, what's the closest Vesuvio around here? My first thing is, okay, let's go to Washington State and go to Mount St. Helens and look at that kind of soil. Who knows? And they told me, no, we would never do that. It's too far away. It makes no sense. You need to look, I think I said that, you need to go up river because we canoe empty and we like to come. So this is their tradition, now. Who knows? Maybe we'll find out that actually they like to canoe against the river in the past. Other thing, I wanted to sample inside the longhouse that they use today. And the chief said, you can, but if I was you, I wouldn't, because what is done here stays here. The spirit don't like this. And so I didn't sample, because I start to feel the spirits. And when, I know, I'm sorry, but when you work with them and the respect they have for this house, for their ancestors, they don't say the spirit, they said the ancestors. For them, the ancestors are always protecting us, and you don't want to disturb them. The way, I don't know if I connect 100% with that, but I really respect, and somehow I understand that. So for instance, they have protocols when you excavate. You don't swear, you don't eat on the thing, really you are dealing with something that is sacred, and they have a connection to the elements, which I really, really appreciate, because I don't remember where we all made of the same particles, right? And so we share a little bit of carbon, me and the soil. And but I know other colleagues have it's very difficult to work with other nations because they're very, very protective. They don't trust. I asked permission to do this. I asked permission to stream it, because I would have never done it if they didn't want it.
Okay, so no more time for questions. I just wanted to, a very quick thing, were you ever able to maybe convince one of the young people from the group to perhaps get into geoarchaeology and study their own sites with all this?
So yeah, they love drones and LiDAR,
Who doesn't?
so they're great operators.
That's
So I'm
great.
gonna go into that direction.
Yeah.
No, but that's amazing.
That's
I
a
mean,
way of
LiDAR
having
is fantastic when you work in this kind of landscape. And I mean, you have the LiDAR map. You walk, you see on your phone, you see where you are. Boom, you are in a depression, and then you put a peak. So that they're very interested in microscopes. And this, I didn't find many people.
Okay, takes time. Okay, thank you once again, Francesco. So now let's move on to a very quick coffee break, uma pausa bem rápida para o café. Já estamos atrasados, mas